All right. Good afternoon. This is Say Who Say What, which is a video and radio talk show that I'm doing, a kind of blog about my work with the A String of Pearls, Living the Lunar Life series. I'll be talking in this series about why the study of the lunar sciences and what the lunar sciences are, and how these things apply to and can be effectual for your life. Today's date is October 3rd. Its lunar date shows that the moon is presently in the sign of Taurus, and we are at the 18th digit of the moon. The digits of the moon, of course, which we'll talk about in these series, are the very nights of each of the lunar calendar's individual increments. The moon, we're asking the question first, why the moon? We know that for thousands of years, human beings have romanticized this idea of the moon, this shining, glowing figure that sits in our heavens, that shapeshifts from night to night. And so the poets have written about her. We sent a man supposedly to the moon in 1969, July 20th. That was a year after my birth, and 19 days to the date. I'm born in the sign of Cancer, and so my mother called me a moon child. I've always myself romanticized about the moon and been very much enthralled with any idea of anything to have to do with the moon, from a romantic sense, but also from a scientific sense. There are quite a few interesting things that I've noted in my studies about the moon and about our relationship to her. The distance of the Earth from the moon is about 225,745 miles. And that's a pretty long distance. Yet the moon has effect on the ocean tides on this planet. The body's water mass is 3/4 the total mass of the Earth itself. And human beings' bodies are also that same ratio, 75%, or 3/4 of the full total mass. It's interesting that the moon, with this distance of well over 200,000 miles away, could have such a powerful influence on the largest bodies of water on our planet, and also the water content of our own bodies. Some of the modern scientists have looked at the possibilities that the moon may actually also influence how we think. And some of the discussion of this Lunar Life series that I'm going to be exploring with you in video and in audio, I'll be talking about some of those discoveries. But a lot of the things that I will also be talking about and discussing will be from the ancient lore, and we'll be looking at some of the mythologies from different cultures. We'll look at some of the original places that we got some of our ideas about the moon from. Now, the circumference of the moon is said to be 6,783 miles. That's its measurement in a circle around. And of course, even though we see the moon as being a circle up in the heavens, the moon would actually be considered more like an oblong shape, more like an egg than an actual perfect circle, as is the case with a lot of the physical massed heavenly bodies that are out there in our solar system. They're not perfect spheres, but more oblong in shape. The diameter of the moon, that is the line that passes from one side of its equator to the other side, is roughly 2,159 miles. The moon itself is 27% of the Earth's mass, and so it's relatively smaller that number 27, they say 27 to 28% is also a significant number, which we'll discuss in some of our talks about the digits and in lunar astrology, what are called the nakshatras or star lords of Hindu astrology. The weight of the moon is exactly 81 quintillion tons, which is pretty heavy. The Earth, larger, has a weight of 6 septillion tons, and so we get an idea of this relationship between the difference in mass and size between the Earth and the moon, and yet we can acknowledge the difference as not being so much that it doesn't stop the electromagnetic influence, more probably magnetic than electric, I would say. The sun also has effect on our ocean's tides by way of electric influence. And so the sun and moon together make up what could be said to be an electromagnetic influence on these bodies. Our physical bodies, again, are mostly made up of water, and so there is a very easily made inference that these bodies too would also be affected by the moon's tides. Now, the moon itself has been observed, as I've said, for a very, very long time, for many centuries, as being a kind of cyclical, recurring event in its waxing and in its waning. What I mean by that is from new moon to through that period of time where the amount of light that hits the surface of the moon from the sun increases until we have what we call the full moon phenomenon, which is a course of 14 days. The following 14 days, the moon wanes, and so the light becomes lesser and lesser until finally we come back again to the new moon, wherein we can't really even see the moon itself. It's those dark nights. Much has been associated with people's emotional states as well as mental states with regards to the moon in this regard. And so some of our discussion is also going to be along those lines. This is a course of study that I've been engaged in for the past 13 years. The compilation of these studies I've called ASoP, which is an acronym for a string of pearls. A string of pearls is the title that I chose for a couple of reasons. One, when you look at the moon in its 28 digits or in its 8 phases set into a circle, it looks like a pearl necklace. Also because the moon has also been associated because of its appearance with being like a big pearl. Yeah. Interesting things to note historically in some of the teachings of sexual alchemy. Sexual alchemy will be one of the subjects that I discuss with regards to the lunation cycle and the mysteries of the moon. The mysteries of the moon are rooted very much in matriarchal, what I call her story or culture. And these cultures were originally agriculturally based. They were based on the idea of sowing seeds and growing produce instead of gathering them in the way that human beings did when they were still, very much nomadic in the pre-Neolithic stages. And this whole science of planting actually was discovered by women. It was discovered, it is believed, when women began to notice that there was this relationship between the appearance of their monthly flowering or their menstrual cycle, their moon. This occurrence of the moon triggered a response in their bodies that we now know as the menses. It's interesting to note that in the bodies of pubescent girls who come to that age where they first begin their menstrual cycle, girls are not born menstruating. The body has to reach a critical body fat percentage of 28% before the first menses or menarche occurs. 28 again is a number that you'll constantly be hearing. You may be hearing, some variations of that number, 27, 28, even 29 in reference to the moon. But the average, it appears nights of the moon are 28, and it's interesting that the brain has a trigger mechanism that kicks on once a pubescent girl reaches that percentage of body fat. And with this comes her entry into the sisterhood, the blood sisterhood, where every woman that we know, except women, of course, who may be more athletic, whose body fat percentage is under 28%, menstruate regularly on a 28-day cycle, although some women do have a variation. Some women can have a menstrual cycle that spans 2 months before the appearance of their flowering. Some even a little longer. Some of it depends on different things, genetics, diet, levels of stress, etc. The menstrual cycle, contrary to popular belief that it is a state of impurity, based on Old Testament writings, and in our modern times, most women look at their menstrual cycle as being a bother. We have these names. My friend is coming for a visit. Red wings and all these different things that women have associated their menstrual cycles with not being so positive a thing. Such was not so in ancient times. In ancient times, a woman's moon cycle was something that was celebrated, not just by the women that she shared this experience with, but the entire community. And in fact, women were seen as being oracular during these times, and would often take, as we would say, refuge from everyone else, a kind of retreat into a special hut where women attended only to their needs and to themselves. It's a very emotional and a sensitive time. It's a time that is filled with increased dreaming. It is a very powerfully sexual time as well, although during patriarchy, the idea of sexuality revolving around the menstrual cycle was something that was frowned on. And that'll be a discussion that we delve into more deeply when we talk about the matters of sacred sexuality and the lunation cycle. The interesting thing to note, we'll rewind a little bit with this thing with menarche and women. The female sex is actually the very earth of the roots of the male sex. What do I mean by that? Well, every animal, every human on this planet begins first as female. For the first trimester of our lives, approximately 2.5 month, we are all female. And it is not until some genetic factor that is triggered in the body that what's triggered is the hypothalamus kicks in, and it causes the same set of genitalia. Men and women essentially have the same sexual organs, but inverted and protruded. The ovaries are really the same as the testicles. The differences, I would say, in the male and female reproductive systems, of course, besides the obvious, the protruding penis or lingam and the internal vulva, are that the menstrual cycle and ovulation cycle of women definitely make a big distinction between the biological realities between men and women. Also, the ovulation cycle has it that one egg drops from one ovary on the right or the left side, and then from the other, a new one grows to replace it. Women in their fertility cycle have one egg during a 28 night or 28 period of days, whereas men have these billions of sperm cells. In the same way, I guess you could say that when we look at the difference in the movements of the sun and the moon, which are two metaphors that I'll use extensively in relationship to men and women, although many of the lunar deities of mythology are often men, but with very powerful relationships to the divine feminine. But the sun passes through the 12 signs of the zodiac in a period of approximately 360 days. 5¼ days are added onto the calendar in order to make, adjustments. And, we of course, under this solar calendar that we're observing, observe leap year. The lunar calendar, which is the basis of so many of the original calendars before our time, now, although there are certain cultures that still carry them. The Chinese zodiac is based on the lunar cycle. The Jewish calendar is based on the lunar cycle. The Islamic calendar is based on the lunar cycle. The lunar cycle, different than the solar, doesn't have 12 months but 13. 12 months, the months being 28 days or nights rather than the 30 days that we see in the solar calendar. It's interesting also that in solar astrology, which is much younger than lunar astrology was the first and original form of reckoning astrology in the heavens. And also, historically, women were the ones who originally found this science, which is another one of the deep discussions that we'll be having. But the sun takes roughly 360 days to pass through all 12 signs in these 30-day increments. It's interesting that in solar astrology, there are 3 decans, they call them, which are, a decan is a group of degrees, 10 degrees each. Each sign has 30 degrees, or 3 decans that it passes through. In the lunar calendar, instead of having its mansions divided by these decans, the lunar mansions are divided into degree separations of 13 degrees. 28 days or nights times 13 months in relationship to this gives us exactly 364 days. And so a day and a quarter was added to a more fuller and actually a more accurate form of calculating our yearly calendar. And so the old lunar calendars were also called a year and a day calendar. The look at this precision that is actually based on this relationship of women to their body's natural cycles is a very powerful point of reference for us in understanding how our orientation and our thought towards women should actually be adjusted from what it is that we've been taught under patriarchy. There is a tendency to downplay the feminine mysteries and even consider them to be non-existent by the society and this culture that we're in. My studies with this Living the Lunar Life series, which comes out of the ASoP doctrine. I call it a doctrine, and I don't necessarily mean it in the religious way that people, normally have accepted that colloquialism, but more so along the lines of a kind of doctrine of science, of observational science. And so a lot of what I'll be sharing with you deals with the observation of the movements and the periods of lunation of the moon, and looking at and studying how this relates to us. What are the meanings of each of these positions that the moon takes on every night? Is there any significance? What is the significance? Does it have any actual physical influence on how we think, how we feel, what we do, and what we don't do? Is there a way of taking our knowledge of such things and using them to our benefit? And so at this point, so that I don't get too far off track, what I'm going to do is talk to you briefly about the system that comprises what these studies of mine have been for the past 13 years. I call this study, again, ASoP, a string of pearls, which refers again to this imagery that we see. If you look at the image behind my head